friends, thank you so much for listening to Horrible People podcast. Now, I do have a little favor to ask you guys. If you could go in wherever you're listening to, leave a rating, give a like, maybe give a follow, a subscribe, whatever it may be, that would be extremely helpful. Engagement like likes, follows, comments really do help us grow, and I very much appreciate your continued listening.
Oh, we're the horrible people, don't you understand? Painted with broad strokes by a clueless hand. Misunderstood, misquoted, and left in the dark.
Thank you so much for tuning into Horrible People podcast. I'm Jenn McDonald, and the horrible person that I have on today is George. George, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you because I think this is an extremely important topic. So would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about who you are, where you're from, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's George. I live in the UK. I run an online space that speaks about men and boys advocacy, particularly men's mental health and male suicide, called The Tin Men. Initially on Instagram, but on the various different social media platforms now. And the ambition is to essentially have the missing half of the gender equality conversation, the ugly half, the unpopular half, the half that makes you a horrible person, I suppose. Amongst many other things I get called. And it's been a real challenge, emotional challenge, physical challenge. It's kind of an interesting creative challenge, like trying to have these conversations about, you're trying to avoid all these trapdoors and custard pies and things, people trying to smear you. So yeah, it's been maybe 4 or 5 years now.
Oh, wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah.
So how did it's the Tin Men blog
The Tin Men blog is
Men.
what I say when I can't get the Tin Men handle. But the Tin
Understood.
Men.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did the Tin Men come to be, and what are your initiatives and visions for this?
Oh, I mean, originally it was purely a private account that I wanted just for myself because I live in London, which is obviously quite a progressive city. Politically, I consider myself progressive, left wing. I lived in Peckham at the time, which is like the most progressive part of the most progressive city in the country. And you can imagine the sort of conversation I'd be getting into. And as someone that is left, but also believes in sort of having real evidence-based conversations, I wanted to make sure I had at arm's reach, like under the table, quite literally under the table on my phone, like information about the things I'll be talking about. So often I'll be in discussions with in a lot of feminist spaces when I consider myself a feminist. I'll be talking about domestic violence and sexual abuse and violent crime, and someone would be talking about violence against women, for example, and I'd get my phone out, the Tin Men with no followers at the time, and I'd be like, "Why are we talking about violence against women when 81% of homicides worldwide are against men?" Like asking in good faith. I'm not trying to be a troll. And then people didn't like that. People really didn't like it. And I would often get the finger in the face, the yelling, the incel this, and you're misogynist, and it's not about that. And I was like, well, it is about that. It's about violent crime, and men are subject to violent crime too. And then I guess I had a journey of being sort of bewildered by two sets of things. I'd always be shocked by the issues, such as 81% of homicide victims being men. But then I'd, in many ways, be more shocked at people's response to what I was saying. Like, I'm just literally reading the facts to you. And people just didn't like it. People didn't like it. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't believe me. Not just that, but many, many things. And I suppose I went down the rabbit hole, as they say. And then the Tin Men, which originally was just quite literally an archive of information for my own personal use, became something that seemingly other people wanted to have access to as well. And then I had a few followers, 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 10,000, 50,000, 60,000, and now, nearly 70,000. So
Crazy.
Yeah, there's an appetite for it, I think.
100%.
An appetite for real conversations around men and boys that is like real evidence-based, progressive, left-wing, but outside of feminist frameworks. So that's my niche.
No, I think that's so important. And clearly, like you said, there is an appetite for it. You've got, plenty of followers, plenty of people trying to learn more about this. So what kind of backlash would you say that you receive when trying to raise awareness about this?
Loads, like all sorts, like also. I mean,
All
not as much as
kinds.
people think. Like people think I'm inundated with hate mail every day, and I'm really not. So I mean,
Okay,
put your violin away. Uh,
perfect.
but I do get a few nasty things said about me. I mean, I had a bit of a backlash just the other day when I made the suggestion that perhaps the reason so many men drop out of therapy is because there are so many male therapists. Like such a mundane suggestion. I don't understand why that's controversial whatsoever. I was saying that 85% of clinical psychologists are women. Maybe that's
Okay.
why so few men go to therapy. And I was looking at research that found that half of men that did drop out of therapy said they didn't have a connection with the therapist. And I was like, well, maybe it's because it's not a man. Maybe men want to speak to other men. Maybe male therapists are more able to see and understand male clients. I don't understand why that's so profoundly controversial. We've got no problem talking about that in male dominated workspaces, quite rightly so. Like I know people in engineering, finance, where they are male dominated, and I know women that work in those spaces that are unfairly treated or not seen in the same way. So I was just like, well, maybe we can extend that thinking to therapy. We know men aren't going to therapy. We know that therapy doesn't seem to work as well against men. So I make a suggestion of let's get more men as therapists, and boom, called a misogynist and X, Y, Z, whatever else. So
Of
that doesn't happen that
course.
often, but I
Good.
mean, I've had backlash for all sorts of things. Yeah,
It still happens. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's
not
very
but
unfortunate.
but for every message of hate I might get, I'll get 100 messages of thanks and kindness. So it really is a lot more positive than negative.
Good. Okay, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
And what kind of misconceptions do you often see or hear in general society about men's mental health?
People seem to think men's mental health is entirely in their head. We like to pathologize like masculinity, for example, and we are willing to talk about the things I talk about. We are willing to talk about men's issues, but only when they're internalized or they allow us to talk about men's personal individual failings. We don't really like to talk about men's mental health as a product of structural causes. Like I like to talk about a man, for example, who's losing a child in a child custody battle, or a man who's maybe being abused by a partner, or a man that's losing his job and going into debt, can't pay the bills. These are all causes of mental health problems within men. So I guess I'm going upstream to talk about what are the upstream causes of these issues that often do lead to suicide and many, many mental health issues. So I guess I'm trying to take mental health out of our brains and away from things to be medicated and talk about it as more as like what's causing these problems. Like we all know the biggest risk to my life and all men's lives is suicide. That will remain the same every day till I'm 50, maybe even beyond that. So there's a lot to be discussed, and it's not getting better. It's getting much worse. Like we in the UK, we've just had the worst year yet for male suicide in
Oh my
this
goodness.
century. That is. So it's not with all our talk of men's mental health and male suicide, which I appreciate. It's not. It doesn't seem to be making anything better. In fact, it's getting worse. So I'm all for like a change of direction, a new ideas, a new approach to what is mental health, what is causing so many men to take their own lives. A lot of those conversations are unpopular and uncomfortable, as we've discussed, but they need to be had nonetheless. And I feel like I want to represent a thicker skin of political conversation that is unafraid to have these conversations, but whilst also not being needlessly antagonistic. So, yeah, it's a real challenge to be solved.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess, do you think that mental health talk in general tends to, I guess, go more towards women's needs opposed to men's? Is that maybe part of the
Yeah,
issue there?
generally speaking, yeah, sure. We're seeing quite a renaissance in the UK of what's called social prescriptions rather than clinical prescriptions. So what that means is that if you're suffering of a mental health problem, depression, anxiety, loneliness, whatever, instead of being given a clinical prescription for medication, you're given a social prescription, which means you're sent off to like a walking group or an allotment
Oh,
or, dog walking society, or we have these things called men's sheds in the UK, which are just the most wonderful things. It's these different sheds that open up all over the country. They're set up by men, often for men, although women do often go to them too. And it's often older men who are lonely get together, go to these sheds, and they build and mend tools and toys for local families and children. So it's a
oh my
bunch of lonely
goodness.
men getting together, fixing toys for local kids, and it has such a profoundly positive impact on men's mental health because they are often very lonely. Just being in the same space as other men who are lonely really, really helps. They're getting that sense of purpose and belonging and camaraderie. They're building and fixing things for local families, which is obviously excellent. And it's lightening the burden on our already impoverished National Health Service by taking them away from hospitals and taking them out of the clinical environment and doing something that's actually of massive societal benefit. So, yeah, hiking groups I've seen, cycling societies, so the breakfast clubs, like really, really, really exciting things like that. Football games and stuff like that. Like, I'm really a big fan of social prescription, and it's in many ways it's an indictment of how much we have failed men's health, because that's not been done by the National Health Service. It's been done by independent individuals who are sort of sick of being failed. And lots of women go too. Lots of women want to do it. So a lot of women want to go on like hiking groups, and that's excellent too. It's not just about men, or it does seem to be more beneficial to men. But who am I to speak on what women do or don't need?
No, I think that makes total sense. I mean, being active, being around other people seems to be a huge benefit to mental health in general. And I mean, I'm in Canada. I don't know of anything like that here in Canada, and I think that would be
Lots of hiking routes in Canada.
huge. Yeah, fair enough.
I went to a fundraiser for a charity, which I'll shout out, called Strong Men, and they support bereaved men, a lot of fathers who've lost children. I
Okay.
met at the fundraiser. I met a guy called Chunk, who was just like the most traditionally masculine man you could ever imagine, almost like the cartoon character, like a big, burly, bold man. And he lost his child, and he never went to
Oh,
see a therapist, never opened up, never told anyone about his pain. He went on one walk up a mountain, just one walk, and he would not stop crying. He was like blubbering like a baby by the time he got to the top. And now he's so open, so transparent of his emotions. And now he runs the walks. Now he's the
oh
guy
my
that's leading
God.
the walk. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to cry. When he's telling me, I was like, that is so beautiful. Like, thank you. That is so wonderful. And that is happening all over the world. And I'm a big fan of getting us out of hospitals and clinical environments and just exercising more, being with each other, doing these social prescriptions, and being more like Chunk. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge success story. I mean, and like you were kind of saying, I feel like opening up is so important for mental health and overcoming
Mm,
any sort of issues that you've experienced that might be contributing to, mental health struggles.
mm,
Now, you were saying that we need to see more men, I guess, offering therapy. Um,
mm.
do you think there's any way that that can be achieved to encourage more men to get into that industry? I
Uh,
guess it's a hard one.
I mean, there's lots of professions I'd like to see more men working within, not just therapy, but
Okay,
I don't know. It's not necessarily about more male therapists. It's just more people studying psychology, and
fair.
whatever comes out of these spaces, I don't know. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I do talk to a lot of psychologists and train them, but wouldn't quite know how to get. I know I did a talk not long ago for the NHS about male suicide and helping their senior clinicians understand what it is that's going on to men. And they were asking me, well, what does the NHS do? What are we supposed to do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's so far above my pay grade. I'm not even qualified to be in this room, to be honest. And I'm certainly not qualified to answer that question. But I, I just think more men in these spaces. I know, like, even it's getting worse. I mean, even like, I think clinical psychologist trainees, there's even a higher proportion of women, which is excellent. We just need more men as well.
Yeah, for sure. That representation.
Mm,
Now, there are, from what I see just from my end, views that men's rights groups and men's mental health groups are misogynistic, like you had
mm.
mentioned earlier. How do you think that misconception came to be?
Well, people seem to think. I mean, everyone. The next thing people will be talking about is Andrew Tate. Of course, let's just talk about him
Yes.
now.
Okay.
I hate that guy. Obviously, I hate him because he's often called a men's rights activist, and I'm like, he is
Oh,
so
yeah.
not a men's rights. I've never heard him speak about anything I talk about ever. In fact, I've only ever seen him belittling men that I talk about. But we seem to just heap all these men we don't like, the Andrew Tates, the red pills, the pickup artists, the incels, the MGTOWs, all get stuffed into this thing called the manosphere. And men's rights activists are in there too, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think men's rights activists are inherently bad. I'm sure, like every group, there are problematic members, but as someone that's, I guess, quite prolific in these communities, although I don't consider myself a men's rights activist, I have never seen this misogyny that people talk about beyond just,
Yeah.
individual members. And what I see in men's rights spaces are quite compassionate, forward thinking, progressive views of men and masculinity and women, and an absolute like hatred of people like Andrew Tate. Really, really hate. If you go on like the men's rights subreddit, which is probably the biggest men's rights community in the world and probably the most controversial, if you look and if you just search their sub for Andrew Tate, you will only ever see disdain for him, and quite rightly so, because he gives them such a bad name. They've
Yeah.
done some like really important work, but I feel like men's rights activists are very really mischaracterized, and often compared to groups that they're not a part of. Like they're not in like incels, they're not like MGTOWs, they're not like Andrew Tate, they're not the pickup. They're very different, and they have a unique set of goals, which are often very noble. So yeah,
They're just being grouped in with the wrong people.
yeah. It's crazy, and I don't think no serious person really uses the term the manosphere. Certainly not men's rights activists. It's sort of like a ghoulish word that no one really knows what it means, but it's bloody scary. The manosphere. What is
Yeah, I
that?
was going to
It's
say,
like
I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know what that
yeah,
means. So I guess maybe there
like
is no meaning.
yeah. It's like people like looking under their beds and keeping their boys in. Like, watch out for the manospheres around the corner.
Yeah.
Like, what are you on about?
What is
It's
this boogeyman that doesn't
yeah, it's the
exist?
boogeyman. It's the boogeyman, and no, I just don't think it's a real thing. It's just like a very nebulous group that we just heap everyone we don't like into,
Yeah,
even though they've got nothing in common, really.
that's awful
Hmm.
for sure. So, other than mental health, what sort of challenges or initiatives does the Tin Men or any men's rights and advocacy groups tend to focus on?
Men's rights is all about changing the system.
Okay.
That's how I characterize it. They want to change laws, they want to change policy, they want to increase funding for men, they want to talk about men's health, they want to talk about men who are being abused, they want to provide more services for abuse victims, they want to change the law in the way in which we see domestic violence and sexual abuse. Like in the UK, for example, by law, it's impossible for a woman to rape a man, which is incredible. So that's the sort of thing we want to change. There's models of domestic violence such as Duluth that basically exclude men from being victims at all, which has led to essentially there being no services for abused men anywhere in America. So those are the systems that they want to change, and then it goes right down to obviously boys. Like boys' education is really, really bad right now. In like more or less every single level, every single Western country, boys are behind girls now and have been for decades. That's the sort of thing they're talking about. Bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, men's health, of course, is really, really big. Like obviously, in America, again, if you were to write down top 15 causes of death in America, men are leading in 13 of those causes.
Wow.
They die more every single age. They live less life in every single country. It's horrendous. Even in COVID, they were dying at 1.5 times the rate as women, and no one cares or even knows about these things. So
Yeah, I was
there's
going to say that's
there's a
not brought
huge
up in
yeah.
mainstream.
Like any one of those things is deserving of a massive national newspaper headline. Like boys behind every stage of education in every single Western country. I don't know why I don't see that on the front page of every single newspaper every single day. But
Yeah.
it's down to people like you and I to talk about it, and it's just not. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. Like in Canada, where you are, there are no. I think there's one refuge for men in the whole country.
Okay.
One,
Wow.
and I think Trudeau announced. Obviously, he's gone now, but he announced like hundreds of millions of dollars of funding for more shelters, and none of that's going to men.
Yeah.
So I think 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence in Canada is a man, and there's
Oh my
nowhere for them to go.
goodness.
There's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I was definitely wanting to touch on because I feel like men being domestically abused or sexually assaulted is not taken seriously. It's not brought to light in mainstream media. I mean, can you maybe touch on that a little bit? Like, what sort of, I guess not reasoning behind that would be, but what kind of cases you see
Well, in the
where,
UK, I was going to say in the UK, we've just had a man killed and beheaded by his wife and thrown into a reservoir. That was a few days ago.
Jesus.
So it's serious. I mean, even at the highest level, although most partner homicides are against women, it's only about 3 and 4. There's still 25% of our men But in the more, dare I say it, mundane forms of domestic violence, the lesser forms, it's more or less 50-50. In like Canada, for example, we're coming up to the anniversary of his death, sadly. But Earl Silverman, he was a victim of abuse. He got no help. In fact, he would often go to seek help, and he was told by services that he was the abuser. So he would
Wow.
be looking for help as an abuse victim. He would pick up the phone, as we encourage men to do, reach out for help, open up, be vulnerable. He did, and he was called an abuser by the people trying to help him. So he was re-victimized. And what Earl did, he decided to set up his own shelter in, what is it, Albury? What is it? Well, Alberta.
Is Alberta?
Alberta. He set it up in Alberta. It was the only refuge anywhere in America, in Canada, for abused men. He funded it himself. He didn't get a single penny from the Canadian government. They refused to give him anything. He funded himself. He ran it into the ground. He had no money left. He lost absolutely everything, including the shelter and his house, and he killed himself.
Oh my goodness.
And his death, in his suicide note, it said, "Maybe my death will create a need." And that was about 10 or 12 years ago. The anniversary is the end of April, so not far. And it hasn't created a need because there is no services for men in Canada still. So even stories like Earl's are not enough to get Canada or anyone to open their eyes to what's going on to abused men. It's 1 in 3, maybe up to 50% of all victims are men. We can argue about, is it less or more severe? It's hard to quantify, but there are certainly a lot of men out there that are being abused, that are not being helped. And often they do turn to suicide because there's no option
escape,
in their
right?
view. No, yeah. And that's why I find it so frustrating, because everyone seems to talk about male suicide, and I'm happy about it, but no one wants to talk about things like domestic violence, which lead directly to male suicides. That's too unpopular, or that's misogynistic, or that's not right, or you're minimizing women. And I'm like, well, these are the things that cause male suicide. If we're going to talk about male suicide, then let's talk about it properly. And one of the big causes is things like that. Like 11% of men who are being abused in the UK will consider suicide. And when you consider how many hundreds of thousands of men are being abused in the UK and millions in North America, that's such a massive contingent of vulnerable men to suicide that are just not being helped. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and not a huge amount of good news, I'm afraid.
Yeah, 100%. It seems like a lot of it's just all talk, no action.
Yeah. Well, did you not see that thing in Canada where the politicians of Canada walked around in women's high heels, including the men, to basically
Yes.
reassert their commitment to violence against women? And I was like, well, that's fine, but let's not forget that a huge minority.
So do you know of any lobbyist groups outside of the UK, in Canada, or the United States? Primarily Canada, I guess the majority of our listeners are Canadian,
Yeah.
that would lobby the government to make these changes.
If you're looking for a great organisation that is supporting men in Canada, the only one perhaps, it's the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, aka the CCMF. They're a charity. They do exactly what I just described. They help men. They get abusive men into safe spaces. They look after men and families. And one of the problems of refuges, the few refuges that do accept men, often don't accept children. And because so
Oh
many abused men
no.
have children, they decide they're not going to go to the refuge because they don't want to leave their child at home, understandably so. So they'll just stay in the abusive households. But the CCMF do accept children, and I think that's really important too. So
Oh,
they're a
okay.
wonderful organisation that's certainly worth supporting, Googling, and hopefully donating to.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll link them below in the show notes just so that people have access to that. I find
Great.
it crazy that there are so few, because it seems like in every single, not even major city, but every single city, there are women's shelters, women's support groups of all kinds. I mean, I live
Mm-hmm.
near a fairly small, poorly financed city. And I mean, there are at least 5 different women's shelters and women's groups, and
Yeah.
nothing for men. Nothing for men.
Yeah, we have on our road. I mean, it's because of the nature of refuges, you don't actually know where they are, but I do know there's one near us. But
Fair. Okay.
yeah, they are. I mean, in the UK, we have maybe 3,500 beds for women. I think that's in England, 3,500, and we have about 50 for men.
Oh
So
wow.
it's like tiny percent. It's like virtually nothing. In, like I said, in Canada, maybe 1 or 2 shelters. In America, maybe the same. And again, thousands for women. And I don't begrudge a shelters for women. We need more for women too, but there are virtually none for men. And is just so not good enough. And obviously that leaves a lot of women vulnerable, because if a man is in an abusive relationship and he's got nowhere to go, that leaves women open to violent retaliation from that man. Like, he's stuck. Well, if he can leave, that can break the cycle. The important thing is breaking the
True.
cycle. Like, half of domestic abuse is bilateral, meaning both partners are being violent in what's a cycle of violence. So the important thing is to break that cycle, and you need to get both partners out. Both partners need help, otherwise the cycle is going to continue. So it's violent women also need help, because no one wants to live a life of violence, and no one wants women to be vulnerable to self-defense or reciprocal violence by the man. So it really doesn't help anyone. And of course, then there's women in same-sex relationships that are not being helped. Like, lesbian women
Okay.
notoriously have really, really high rates of partner violence. A lot of data finds they are the most violent. So
Wow.
they're not being helped either. We're stuck in this sort of ideological tunnel vision where we just cannot comprehend of women being violent. Whereas as someone that does believe in women's autonomy, I believe women can do anything a man can do. And good or bad, that's what autonomy is. This benevolent view of women as angels or children, I find misogynistic. I just think a woman can be a CEO, or a woman can be an abuser. That's what autonomy is.
Yes. It goes both ways.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I guess that brings me into another question that I had about the misconception that men have all of the privileges. Men are very privileged, women are underprivileged. I'm sure there must be like some examples of cases where men really do have the disadvantage there and aren't as privileged as women, especially to the point that they don't have this support and there is that stigma.
Yeah, I mean, privilege is a two-way street. I accept there are male privileges, but I as someone that's solution orientated, I like to say male privileges rather than male privilege, because male
Okay.
privilege is like a ubiquitous thing. That sounds like there's just one type of privilege, and whereas there are male privileges, but by saying male privileges, you're basically saying that there are other types, and there certainly are ways in which women are privileged. Like, think about how much many more services there are for women. Think about what I
Yeah.
said about boys in education. How boys behind every stage of education in the West. Is that a privilege? I don't think so. Like, think about homelessness or drug addiction or homicide victims. Like, these are all things that male dominating. We're talking 60, 70, 80% men. We're talking about 90% men in jails. We're talking 95% men dying at work. Like, the amount of men that die at work in America will blow your mind. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of men every single year in America dying at work, just doing their job. Like, more men die at work every year in America than all the American military losses from the entire 20-year Iraq war. That happens
Oh
every
my
year.
goodness.
So I read that 100,000 people die in the fishing industry every year in the worldwide. 100,000. I don't
Wow.
know how many of those are men, because it didn't tell you, but I imagine 90% or more.
It's a male
Like,
dominated
it's,
industry.
yeah, it's probably like close to 100% of fishing related deaths are men. And that is not a privilege, guys. Think about Black Lives Matter was obviously the big social movement of the last 5 years or so. 95% of those deaths are men, maybe more. 99% of Black Americans killed by police are men. Is that a privilege? I don't think so. That's not to say there are certainly privileges to being a man, and we know them all too well. Um, but it's not a one-way street, and it never has been. So we need to talk about both sides of the coin.
Yeah, I totally understand that for sure. Um, Now, you had, I believe, a tagline that I had perhaps seen on X was that you are rebranding men and boys advocacy.
Hmm.
Could you possibly explain what that means?
Well, going back to what we talked about with
I
the
feel
men's
like you
rights
just did
activist.
for the last half hour.
Well, yeah, I mean, when people think of men's rights advocacy, like, although the reality is very different from what we are told, what we see is the angry white man shouting in someone's face. There's the misogynist. It's like, whenever I think of
Andrew
men's rights
Tate's.
advocacy, yeah, it's like big, bold, capital letters in your face. It's aggressive. It's unapologetic, and I I think that needs to be rebranded. I work in the creative industry. I'm a professional filmmaker by trade.
Oh,
I
neat.
I work You too? Do you work in the film?
I don't. I'm so sorry. I
Oh,
said neat.
oh, neat. I thought you said. I was going to say me too. I was like, wow, okay. So I guess I've spent the first 10 or 15 years of my career helping large brands, large like really like global brands, connect with audiences by changing the way they present themselves, tone of voice, visual style, creative strategy, all these things. It's been like, yeah, very lucrative. I enjoy it to an extent. When I looked at men's advocacy, I could not believe all these things. That I'm sure a lot of your viewers' minds are blown right now, and I've had my mind blown. I continue to have it blown, but I was just couldn't believe these things. It felt like I was being given a, a hand of winning cards of all these issues, and I was just like, if I can just put these cards down the right way, I can make some real change here. I can change some people's minds. It's really a branding problem that's going on because the issues are enormous, unprecedented, and real. Huge amounts of evidence. Like when I talk about domestic violence and I say men and women are equally likely to be abused in America, I'm not just making it up. I'm using 200 studies compiled by the greatest domestic violence researcher ever. The literal
Wow.
founder of the field of family violence research compiles 200 studies across 30 years to show this. It's gender parity in domestic violence, partner violence. So that is an amazing piece of information. And for me as a creative to be given that, I'm like, that's the an ace of spades for me. That's a royal flush. So I've been trying to put those cards down in a winning way, and I must admit it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. Often I put the hand down and it loses. But the problem is a branding problem because, as we can agree, that these issues are real, the evidence is compelling, but it doesn't seem to be connecting. Like we said, there is no headline for boys in education, but there really ought to be. So it feels like it's down to people like me as creatives and strategists to work out what is the cheat code to unlocking the compassion in people's heads for these really, really important things that, like I said, are killing men
Yeah.
at such enormously high rates. I don't think we would accept 4,500, 5,000 women dying every year at work, but we seem to bury our head in the sands and not give a shit when they're men.
Yep.
So that's an
I feel
interesting
like that would
thing.
make major headlines if that was the
Yeah,
case.
yeah,
Women
yeah.
dying in the industry.
Crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and it's just like I know we're talking about everyone in the UK and probably the world is talking about adolescence right now, where a young woman is stabbed to death in a fictional Netflix series. I live in London. Knife crime's a reality that we see every single day. And I'm telling you, it's not young white women being stabbed to death. It's black boys. Like 90% of knife-related deaths are black boys. So it
Wow.
feels like every single week a young black boy is being killed in my city by knife crime. And we never hear about it. And then a fictional white woman's killed on Netflix and everyone loses their mind. And I'm
It's
like,
viral.
yeah, like two real boys were stabbed just last week and there's nothing.
No.
Another boy was killed last week by knife crime, nothing. And then a fictional woman, young girl, was killed on Netflix. I just don't understand how we can't, like, it's
And the world
crazy,
goes mad.
crazy. For like something like 40 knife-related deaths, teen deaths in London every year. 40 kids stabbed to death in London every single year. 95% of them are boys. One year is all of them, 100%.
Oh my
And
goodness.
nothing said or done. So
No
yeah,
awareness, no nothing.
no. And then what will be annoying? Eventually, a young girl will be stabbed to death, sadly, which is just as tragic. And then suddenly, the mayor of London is out on a soapbox saying epidemic of violence against women. And I'm like, sure, but there's been about 12 epidemics of violence against men and boys that you said nothing about this year, nothing at all. And then finally, inevitably, a young woman is killed, and then everyone, all the compassion I've been desperate for boys is out there, and it's like you do care, you just don't seem to care about the boy bit.
Yeah, it's just like, is that not enough to grab people's attention? Like, for the
No,
love of
I
God.
know, and they're children. We're talking about kids here. Like,
That's it.
I can understand people not having compassion for men. No, I can't really. But we're talking about kids.
But
Like, do
we
you not
see
give
it
a
more.
shit about
Yeah,
kids?
exactly. These are children.
Mm,
That
crazy.
is mind blowing.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Do you feel so? The majority of my listeners are men, just because I come from the outdoors industry. So the majority of my followers were men. I'd say 70% of the listeners are men. So I am so happy that this conversation is getting out there to them. Do you feel that there is any hesitation from men to even seek therapy in the first place?
Yeah, but also not as much as we suggest. I mean, there's a lot of
Okay,
hesitation from
okay.
everybody. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
the stats are the men that do go to therapy often drop out. 50% will drop out, 25% will
yeah.
drop out after the first session. And they've asked those men, why did you drop out? And half of them, the number one cause was them saying, I didn't have a connection to the therapist. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well then let's think about what the problem might be here. Maybe the therapist is not what could do better. The man turned up, he sat down, he paid his money, he
He
arrived,
tried.
and it didn't work. So let's at least consider that maybe the therapeutic model, in the way we talked about earlier, isn't quite right for men or really anyone. So let's think about that. There was a study in the UK that looked at suicides of middle-aged men, so men that died by suicide, and 91% of them had actually sought help. So more than 9 in 10 of men who died by suicide had actually sought help and still taken their own lives. So I'm not
Wow.
sure what more you want them to do. It's like, that's 90%. And
They're
of
doing all the
those,
right things.
yeah, and they looked at his men, and of those men who had been assessed by a clinician, 80% of them were regarded as low risk or no risk. So these are men that died. 80% of them are seen as no
Wow.
risk. So they sit down, the clinician 80% of the time says, yeah, no risk there, and then he goes and kills himself. So explain to me there where the problem is exactly, because the man, he turned up and he was failed, and that is the bigger problem. I'm sure more men, like everyone, can go to therapy. That is a problem, but it is not as big as the problem of therapy not being adequate for men, especially suicidal men who are being failed and fall through the cracks every single day. And I want to have that conversation. I'm tired of hearing men can talk, men can talk, men can talk, men can cry, men can talk. And so that is not a complete picture. That is just
Yeah.
you shirking responsibility and throwing blame at the feet of men, because we don't want to accept any responsibility for ourselves. And the same is true for boys. I know we talked about boys being behind education. That same
Yeah.
that same 80% of figure exists in classrooms. Of most teachers are women, and often a lot of people are suggesting maybe boys are falling behind because there are so few male teachers, and maybe because it's so dominated by women, and inadvertently. I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose. It's not like female teachers are purposefully holding boys back, but there is evidence that boys are graded lower than girls of the same academic ability. And there seems to be
Wow.
some sort of systemic bias, and like the educational system, a bit like the therapeutic psychological industry, the educational system does seem to be more geared towards girls learning. Like no child wants to sit for 5 hours quietly and read every day, but that's how we educate people. That doesn't work for any child, especially boys, like especially me. I resonate so much for that. When I was a boy and I was given, I wanted to just throw it. I wanted to run around, go crazy, because I was just like a hormonal, testosterone-addled young boy, and I wasn't stupid, but I failed school. I did horrendous. I got E's and D's across the board. So again, a bit like telling men to talk, I was sat down on my bed by my parents every single term, and I was never told off, but they were very disappointed in my lack of achievement. And they never ever considered maybe it's the school that's failing me. It was only ever me failing school. So there's a lot of very clever boys that are being failed by the school, and we're blaming them again, like the men. And they're often blamed for
Yeah.
being naughty boys, for example. Boys are misbehaving. And yeah, that might be true. But maybe it's a naughty boy, or maybe it's a bored boy, or disengaged boy, or a boy that's not interested or frustrated, like I was. I'm not a naughty person. I'm not stupid. But I definitely acted up in school. I definitely wound up my teachers, and I definitely was penalized for it. But because I was bored, because it
Yep.
was boring. It was so boring and just not great for me. And I think that's a worthy conversation to have about maybe our education system is set up more so for the advantage of girls than it is for boys, in the same way that therapy is set up more for the advantage of women than it is for men. But it's not, obviously there's lots of girls that are failed by these educational methods as well, but I'm talking generally speaking, it's more boys.
Yeah, and I mean that makes total sense. I feel like the conversation whenever a boy is failing or anybody is failing is always what's wrong with that child.
Yeah.
But why are we focused on that child? Why are we not focused on the people that are supposed to be
Yeah,
Everybody
I don't
learns
know.
differently. Everybody has different needs.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And
like the same. Yeah, gone.
I do know a lot of men that are extremely intelligent, but they did horrible in school.
Mm, yeah,
I
my
mean,
dad the
they're
same.
just
He did that.
it's
He did
it's
even worse than me.
wild. Oh no.
He did worse than me, and then ended up being like one of the world's leading neuroscientists just because he
Oh my
managed to make it out of
goodness.
school. Did like so bad, and then he taught at university. He was like one of the leading professors in the country. So I would not lose faith. If you're not doing great, that's not abnormal, and consider maybe it's the
Yes.
school system that's actually failing, not the boys. And in
Yes, for
America, I don't know
sure.
what's like in Canada, but a lot of boys like me who can't sit still. Like on podcast, I'm a bit of a nightmare on podcasts because I'm always doing this. I can't sit down and read a book.
I'm
I just don't do that.
fiddling with my
Yeah, me too. Like I can't read books. I have to have audiobooks or podcasts. A
Mhm.
boy like me in school in America, I don't know what's like in Canada, but he just gets given like Adderall. Like so many, like just giving ADHD prescriptions to boys. Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, let's just drug this boy up. That will sit him down, and I'm sure it does. But that is not the solution either.
No.
Like we need more physical kinespacial learning. We need more physical exercise. We need less homework for sure, and definitely lots less of prescription drugs for children. And just, I know they asked boys in the UK what are your three favorite things about school. The things they said were number one, nothing. Number two was
Fair.
yeah. Number two, substitute teachers because they clearly hated their teachers, and three, PE. I was like, yeah, all right. I would have probably said the same thing. So
So
that wakes you up to the problem, I think.
they're telling you what they need.
Yeah,
We're just
yeah.
not listening.
And I've never heard that. All this talk of adolescence and all this talk about what boys are doing and how we need to be. I've not heard one conversation with an actual boy yet. No, I've heard everyone have their say. I've had women, men, prime ministers, presidents, TV pundits, politicians. Like, where are the boys? I've not heard one boy tell us, what do you need from us? Let's
Yep.
stop talking about boys and start talking to boys. Let's stop talking about men and start talking to men and actually having conversations with them rather than telling them what they want and who they are and what they need. It's ridiculous. It's so frustrating. But yeah, I totally agree.
And it all starts at that young age. And it makes me sad because a lot of the men that I do know that did poorly in school and are genuinely very intelligent still have that mindset that I did poorly in school, so I'm not smart. I can't do this. I
Mm-hmm.
can't. And it's like, no, you are smart. You weren't taught properly,
Mm.
or you weren't, I don't know. It's
Mm.
just, yeah, that's,
I
yeah,
think
super
guys need.
sad.
I think guys need vocational education a bit more, which is like you're training for that practical skills. You're educating them towards a job rather than theoretical education where you're like learning, like scientific stuff like that. And like you want to, I think men are more resonate
Smart.
more with vocational learning, that sort of thing. So that's all gone in education. That used to be a big part of education, not anymore. So that's the sort of
Yeah.
stuff I would like to see brought back because those are the things that guys like. Give a guy a box of Meccano and you'll see how clever he really is. But sit him down with a book and you'll get a different story.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I feel like even as a woman, I can resonate with that a little bit because even
Yeah.
like as you said with the reading, I can't. I will read the same page 5 times, and I'm like, "What did I just read?" Like I can
Yeah.
read. I'm just my mind is elsewhere, or
Yeah. I sit in bed with my girlfriend who's an avid reader and she'll literally read like whole chapters and I'm still on the first page and she'll look over and she's like, well, how's it going? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I've read anything. I just drift
I know
off.
what the words are saying, but
Yeah.
that's exactly it.
But
Like,
if
yeah,
if I go on a walk and put on a pair of headphones to my dog, I'll absorb it so much. I'll come back and I'll be brimming of knowledge. But
yep.
that's just not how education's set up, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Well, before we close off, we're nearing that end mark. Is there anything else you think is important for people to know? I feel like we've touched on so much, and this has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Um, I suppose the big painting in broad brushstrokes. I really hope the way we see men and women currently, certainly in the issues they experience, is that we seem to think women have problems, which they do, but we only ever seem to think men are problems. But men have problems
Okay.
too, So when a woman has a problem, we'll work out how do we change society to help that woman, which is absolutely the correct thing to do.
Yeah.
But when a man has a problem, we only ever seem to ask, how can he change himself? And it's just, so like a suicidal man, we say, you need to talk to someone. You need to speak up, open up. Or a boy falling behind in school, and let's just try a little bit harder. Or a man who's, we talk about men's health. Oh, men need to go and see the doctor. And it's like, okay, well then, can we not maybe accept that just like women, men are just subject to their own sort of the systemic issues themselves, and like maybe we need to change society in the same way as we have for women to help men, rather than just expecting men to just fix themselves. Like, I don't necessarily think men have much more power than women, certainly not on an individual level. It's not like they can rewrite the laws or policy. They need help. They need to be helped. And I'm just sick and tired of this idea of just telling men to talk, telling men to open up, telling men to go to the doctor, telling men to work hard or be better, or anyone accepting any accountability or responsibility ourselves as a society to actually help men themselves. And like the damage it's doing is enormous. And our very one-sided view of sexism is leading to the deaths and immiseration of more men than you could possibly imagine. And I don't want to look back at these years with my head hanging in shame. I want to be like, I tried my best. I tried to save as many of the guys as I could. And I think a lot of people will look back at these times and be like, I can't believe we got it so wrong. I can't believe we ever said those things to men. I can't believe we allowed them to die in their thousands, tens of thousands by their own hands. And all we said is be less toxic and talk more. It's like, what does that even mean? So I would ask men to, instead of saying men to talk, I would encourage us all to listen, ask, and act. So listen to men, ask them what they're going through, and perhaps most importantly, act upon what they're telling you. Don't just tell them to talk if we're not then willing to talk about what men are telling us. So the burden of responsibility is down to us now, and I think that's, I guess, the lasting message I want to leave you with.
No, for sure. And I really think that lazy tagline that you're talking about, where men need to talk, is extremely dangerous, because I've seen it so often, and it gave me the misconception that men just aren't talking.
Yeah.
They're not seeking therapy, which
Yeah.
is just focusing on the completely wrong issue. They are looking
Well,
for help, and they're not getting it.
Well, in the UK, about 20% of male suicides are directly related to child custody battles
Oh,
and
God.
relationship breakdown. So we're talking about fathers losing children, losing their homes, having divorces, they lose everything. I
Yes.
don't think that man can talk a child back into his life. If he's lost a child in a custody battle, there's no amount of talking that will bring that child back or heal that pain. Like, talking will certainly help him feel better short term, but unfortunately, the cause of his pain still exists. The same is true for men losing their job. The same is true for men being abused. The same is true for like men in debt. Like, talking is great, but it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to bring the child back. It's not going to bring back his house or his home or his job. So yeah, there's a lot more to it that's not been said, and it's frustrating that we're left in that position. Like, I mean, I work a lot with suicide researchers, and the way we talk about male suicide is a bit like a pot of boiling water on a hob. Like, imagine a pot of water on a hob with the lid on. The heat is on, the water is full of water, it's bubbling up, and the pressure inside is growing and growing and growing. It's a problem, and eventually you arrive at a suicidal event. But talking is the equivalent of taking the lid off that pan, and you're allowing the steam to come out, you're allowing the pressure to come down, the heat dissipates, and you're actually helping bring down that crisis moment. But like everything, the lid has to go back on that pot. Talking has to stop. Like, therapy is an hour and that's it. But the heat is still on. So let's look at what that heat is. So what is the thing that's creating the heat that's causing so much pressure and pain onto men? So taking the lid off and talking is great, but it's not a complete solution. And we need to stop pretending that it is. And that's why the suicide rate isn't coming down, I think. Simply put.
No. Less talk, more action. For sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to write that down.
Awesome. Okay, so I've noticed that you share so much great content. I've seen on X as well as Instagram. So where can people find you online to follow and learn more?
I think Instagram is still the main center point for me, although I'm trying to move more into YouTube. But yeah,
Oh,
Instagram is where the best content is and where the community is and where the conversations are at. So Instagram, The Tin Men, all one word. And from there, you can find all the other accounts and platforms and stuff like that. But yeah, Instagram is where you'll find me.
perfect. And I will mark it all down in the description and the
Thank
show
you.
notes so people can go there, click, and find you. Well,
Great.
thank you so much for this. I think what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal, and I
Thank you.
really, really hope that we see change in our
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah. Well, thank you too. It's always nice to see women in this space as well because we desperately need women. I'm a massive admirer of women. The biggest role models in my life have all been women, and I just think women are excellent campaigners. Really, really great at getting campaigns together. Really, really good at advocacy. I mean, feminism speaks for itself. Like for all of its flaws, there's no denying how powerful and influential it's been, and that's, I think, a testament to the power of women building coalitions and helping and making change. And now I'm always warned when I see women in this space because it can't be easy, but we desperately need you. So thank you too.
Thank you.